Okay. Do we have a quorum?
I can't tell who everybody is.
Oh yeah, we've got a whole lot of people.
Yeah, I don't know who they all are, so I'm not sure. We have,
I believe you do at this
yes, we
point.
do have 4. We have
So-
Ben, Skip, Councilmember Gregory, and Casey, so that gives us a quorum.
Okay, so we're good to get started.
As far as I'm concerned.
Okay. The ATAX meeting of August, what's today, the 13th?
April
April 13th is now
14th.
14th is now called to order. First, I'd like to welcome those that weren't a part of our initial meeting. This is a very, very important function that we have, as most of you have read through the documents. But I'm going to shut up and just turn it over to our budget folks. I will turn it over to you guys now.
Okay. So Andrea, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I get the right one. Yes, this one. All right, can y'all see that?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll just start with the slideshow here. Here's our agenda. Councilmember Gregory, did you want to do the moment of silence?
You gotta flip the page. Kathy. There you go.
Yeah. Councilmember Gregory, can you hear me? You want to do the moment of silence?
Yes, I can. I'm on the phone with our attorney, guys. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
no.
Let's just take a moment of silence, okay?
All right. We will move into the introduction. I believe we have Councilmember Gregory, of course, is here. Skip Condon is here. Ben D'Alessandro is here. And Casey Lavin is here. And then also for staff, we have Amy Wharton, our CFO. Andrea from the clerk's office, who's doing the minutes. And me, Kathy Mercer. So, and I think
This is-
Sherry.
I'm showing up as guest 5, but this is Jamie DeWitt.
Oh, hi, Jamie. And Cherry Ann, I believe our grants compliance manager is also in here with us today. I think there may be other staff members that are hiding under guest logins, but that's all I know of. We'll move on to what we had talked about at our last meeting was having an orientation session for the new members. And I have another slideshow for that. So I did it separately. So can y'all see that one now?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to run through this pretty quickly. Those of you that have been on the committee for a few years, or this will be a good refresher for you just in case. But for the new ones, the new committee members, if you have any questions as we go through this, please just interrupt me and ask. This advisory committee is required by state law. It's appointed by city council and it must consist of seven members who meet these specific qualifications. 4 have to be from the hospitality industry, of which 2 must be from the lodging sector. So there's your 2 members that represent hotels. The other 2 hospitality industry members must be from other areas. It could be tour guides or restaurants or whatever. So we have 2 restaurant members for us. And then we have 1 member that represents a cultural interest of the city, and that's Mamie Bush. And she is not with us today because she's out of town. And then we have 2 at-large members, which is Jamie DeWitt and Councilmember Gregory. Those just provide, you know, an overall look at the city and what meets the city's needs. The function of the advisory committee is it's advisory, as the title says. They advise the city of Charleston on the expenditure of the revenue generated from accommodations tax. And the requirements under state law say that this committee must submit a written recommendation to the municipality at least once a year. So we always have a letter that's signed by the chairman, which is Councilmember Gregory, that is attached to the amended budget or the draft budget or whatever phase we're in at that point in time. And that is submitted to Ways and Means to City Council. And the committee also must review the applications that the municipality receives for spending of accommodations tax. Now, not everything we do is via an application process. This is just the grants portion. But any group that, or anyone that applies through that portion of the process must be reviewed by the committee. We normally meet in November. Obviously, the pandemic has thrown a lot of things into chaos, and this is one of them. So just if you're not familiar with state accommodations tax, it is the 2% statewide sales tax that's collected on transient lodging sales, and transient is defined as less than 30 days. So if you're renting your beach house for a week at a time, or you know that would fall into transient, and you must collect accommodations tax. But if you have a rental property that you're renting for a semester to a college student, that would not require you to collect accommodations tax. It's collected by the state of South Carolina, and it's shared with the counties and municipalities based on where the sale or where the lodging occurred. The state keeps a portion of the revenue. There's some things written into the law where state PRT, Parks, Recreation, and Tourism, and some other organizations that are designated by the state administer multi-county tourism programs and tourism as a whole for the state. And some of that money goes to those programs. There's also a Robin Hood clause that ensures that each county in the state receives at least $50,000 per year in accommodations tax. And, you know, you have a lot of counties that have an interstate running through them, and probably the only hotels they have might be ones that are located at those interstate exits. So they may not get $50,000 if that's their only lodging industry. But the counties that collect more than $400,000 a year, of which Charleston County is one of them. So we, the city of Charleston, fall into that donor category. Those areas, those counties collect more money, so they have to donate some back to the state. So the state withholds a portion of it at the beginning of each year out of our first payment. And then by the end of the year, they reconcile the whole thing and make sure everybody's gotten their $50,000. And then they usually give us back what they didn't need, because they normally withhold more than what they need, because they'll never get it from us later. They don't withhold it up front. So just so you're aware, the city has other tourism revenues, and you may hear talk about those at city council meetings, or read about them in the newspaper or whatever, that are also have rules similar to state accommodations tax. We have a municipal accommodations tax, which is a local tax. Same thing, 2%. Charleston County collects that for us, because they also have a local accommodations tax. So they collect both pieces of it, because it's the same hotels paying the same percentage to them that we would get. So they just collect it and give us our share. And then we have a hospitality fee, which is on prepared food and beverages. And that's collected by the City of Charleston Revenue Collections Division. So you may hear about those other tourism revenues, but today, and what we're talking about at this committee, is only the state accommodations tax. So the law sets out how accommodations tax revenue has to be allocated by the municipalities. The first $25,000 plus 5% of the balance is allocated to the general fund of the municipality. And it is exempt from all of the requirements, which means it's unrestricted. It just becomes general revenues in the general fund. So I guess that was probably established that way to help us cover the cost of, say, implementing this fund. Although I didn't get an extra salary for this piece, but anyway, that's how the first 25,000 plus 5% works. It goes to the general fund and it's exempt from all tourism requirements. 30% of the balance is allocated to a special fund, and it is only to be used for advertising and promotion of tourism. And the law requires that a municipality select an organization that is currently in existence to manage and direct spending of those funds. And if there wasn't already an entity in existence, then we could establish our own, but we have the CVB already doing a really good job with marketing Charleston, as you can tell by all the tourists that are walking up and down the street today. So that is our designated marketing organization. So they get 30% of the balance of the revenue. The next piece of it is the remaining 65% plus any interest that's earned on the money that we have in the bank before we spend it. It is allocated to what we call the 65% fund and used for tourism related expenditures. We must spend it within 2 years of receipt, and we're required to promote tourism and make tourism related expenditures primarily in the areas of the city in which those hotels are located. In other words, where the money was generated, where the revenue was generated. And then in counties with a high concentration of tourism, you can also use funds to provide additional county and municipal services. For instance, if you need extra police protection because you have festivals or that sort of thing. And that's only for those counties that collect more than $400,000 a year. That's how they define a high concentration of tourism. So the remaining 65% fund that we were just talking about, this is how it can be allocated. It can be used. Advertising and promotion of tourism, promotion of arts and cultural events. You can use it for construction, maintenance, operation of facilities, for cultural activities, civic activities. That can include access roads, utilities that are needed for that facility. The criminal justice system, such as law enforcement, also fire protection, solid waste collections, other things that directly serve tourists, and that has to be based on the actual percentage of cost directly attributed to tourists. So there's you can't use it to provide what the municipality would already have to have. You have to only use it for the extra cost that's directly attributable to the tourists that are present in your city. You can use it for public facilities such as restrooms or parks or parking lots that are required for tourism activities. Tourist shuttle transportation, for instance, the Dash shuttle that's downtown that is free. We can use that. We use this money to give money to Carter to support that, the Dash shuttle being free. Waterfront erosion, beach renourishment, which doesn't really apply to us, but it's there, and operation of visitor centers. Now, the grants that we are giving out that we're talking about today are funded from this 65% portion. And because it's not the city that's expending this money, we give it to these organizations, then generally speaking, when they apply for money, it's going to fall into those first three categories. It's going to be advertising, it's going to be promotion of arts and cultural events, and it might be and very often is construction, maintenance, or operation of facilities for civic and cultural activities, such as the museum or other facilities that attract and draw tourists. Promotion in arts and cultural events, sometimes that's our festivals and all, but a lot of times that also falls under advertising and promotion, which is, by the way, the easiest one to document. If you have advertising expenses that are out of market and all, then that's very easy for us to document. You must be a nonprofit organization or a church or religious organization or government entity. It can't be an individual or for-profit business. Those are not eligible. The law also provides for the State of South Carolina Tourism Expenditure Review Committee, which operates through the Department of Revenue. It's authorized by the statute. They have the oversight responsibility for the spending of tax funds, and we must file a report with them annually detailing how much money we received and what we did with it, how we spent it, which organizations we gave it to. And we also have to give them a list. Part of their report just is, who applied for funding and how much did they ask for, and then of course, how much we actually gave them, if any. There is a website that what we call TURC, Tourism Expenditure Review Committee. They operate a website. They have the state law is available there. There's some guidance and interpretations of statutes available there. It's kind of a resource for those kind of questions we might have about what's eligible. So just some basic interpretations of tourism-related expenditures. How do you define that? What does it mean when you say tourism-related? Well, tourism is activities of people taking trips outside their home communities, except for commuting to and from work. So if I live outside of the city of Charleston, I come into Charleston every day for work, I'm not a tourist. But somebody who comes down here, they may come, every day, and they may be doing tourism activities. So it kind of depends on where you're located. But they define home community as commonly it's more than 50 miles one way from the traveler's origin or home. So you have to come 50 miles to be considered a tourist, but that is subjective. For instance, a good example of a community that would receive a lot of tourists that have not traveled 50 miles would be, say, Sullivan's Island or the Isle of Palms, especially like on 4th of July weekend, Memorial Day weekend, when everybody goes to the beach. Isle of Palms actually, I think, challenged the state at one point years ago that they needed to be able to spend accommodations tax money to do beach cleanup and all after, like the 4th of July weekend and all, because you had so many people coming in to those island communities to go to the beach, but they didn't necessarily spend the night. So there's some flexibility in that. It's not a cut and dried answer, for you got to be 50 miles away before you count as a tourist. There's also some other things that are considered. You have to attract tourists, or you have to provide for them for this money to be eligible for tourism-related expenditures, for it to be considered a tourism-related expenditure. And it can't be used for an item that the municipality would already provide. Like we're large enough that we can do a little bit more than some of the smaller communities because we're over that $400,000 threshold. But if you think about a small town that maybe has 5 police cars and they wanted an extra police car because they have a motel, they really cannot do that if those police cars were things that they would normally have to have, if they cannot, because they can't use it for those extra things because they're not over $400,000 in revenue collections. So something that the municipality would normally have to provide cannot be used. You can't use this money for that unless you're in that over $400,000 high tourism concentration category. Some of the things we've figured out over time or that we've looked into over time that aren't eligible for tax funding, we don't fund salaries with grant awards. And for instance, even if Mayor Tecklenburg spent a large amount of his time dealing with promoting tourism, we would have to have a mayor anyway. So you can't fund that salary. And we do not fund salaries through the grants either. Statues and monuments that are, well, I spelled statues wrong, didn't I? I have statutes. Oh, well. Statues and monuments dedicated to a local figure are not considered to be a tourism draw, but if you had a monument or something to a national figure or to a national historic event, such as, say you had a World War II memorial, that might qualify for tourism funding. Educational school-based outreach programs that some of the major tourist events have. We had an instance where one of the major music festivals went into the schools and did outreach programs to expose the school children to jazz, I believe it was, or blues. And we wanted to fund that with ATAX, but that was not eligible. They can fund, say, their event that attracts tourists, but not the outreach portion where it's educational or school-based. Welcome signs and banners are not eligible because you're already here by the time you see that. That hasn't attracted you to get to Charleston. Services to benefit employees of the tourism industry. In other words, if you had a health clinic that served tourists, that would be eligible, particularly say if you had a health clinic that was located near a large tourism attraction. And like if you had, if we had an amusement park or something like that, and there had to be a health clinic, that would be eligible. But if that health clinic is to serve the people who work in hotels or restaurants, it is not eligible because it doesn't serve tourists or provide for tourists directly. The beneficiaries of that would be the employees, not the tourist. Local advertising, for instance, billboards at the airport or along the interstate don't really qualify because that's local. You're already here by the time you see that. Some local TV or newspaper advertising might be okay because, you know, the new people in Myrtle Beach may get the Post and Courier or watch some of our TV channels. But you should really have out of market advertising to qualify. So local advertising isn't really eligible. So as we go through these applications, as you're reading them and evaluating them, and I realize this is a little bit late on the information since hopefully you've already read them. But what we are looking for, generally speaking, first of all, we want to determine if the applicant is eligible. Do they meet those qualifications? Are they a nonprofit or one of those other entities? Do the planned expenditures, what they're asking for, does that fall into one of those eligible tourism-related categories, such as the, advertising and promotion? What's the relative tourism impact? In other words, the return on investment. If we spend accommodations tax money on their advertising, do they in turn bring in tourists in order to increase the amount of accommodations tax that we will get in the future, which in turn we can reinvest and attract more tourists? So they have to have a demonstrated impact, or they should have a demonstrated impact on heads and beds. Do they have the ability, and this isn't related to tourism, this is just good financial fiscal stewardship on our part. Do they have the ability to carry out their planned event or activities? Do they have the right leadership, the right staffing? Do they have other funding sources? Is the percentage of funding from the city and other ATAX, in other words, they could also have ATAX from, say, North Charleston or Mount Pleasant, is that a reasonable amount? And is it in line with the tourism impact projections? In other words, if 40% of their funding for their event, if they're having a large festival and 40% of the funding that they've received is from accommodations tax, then at least 40% of the audience should be tourist for that to be an eligible expenditure. And is the advertising sufficiently out of market? Again, we're talking about versus, say, local advertising. We want to make sure that it's out of market, which the state would consider in, to be other areas of the state more than 50 miles away, or other, even other states. We also need to think about, as we're evaluating these applications, we have these large events, festivals, attractions versus some of the smaller ones. And, the easy answer would be, well, the larger ones obviously have more tourism impact, so let's just not pay attention to the smaller ones. But the smaller events, they fill an important role also. Everybody wants to come here because there's a variety of things to do here, a variety of events and activities. Lots of things for tourists to do. An entire family can stay busy for a week and they can all find something that they like to do. It appeals to wider audiences, so we probably bring in more people because of the atmosphere of culture and activities that you find here. Not everything is specifically going to draw the tourists. They may not come here to see, one of the smaller shows or events that's put on, but it might be something they look at and say, let's go to Charleston because we can go to this big festival, but here's the other 10 things we can do while we're there. Timing is important. Like, is it a less busy time of the year? And I know that makes a big difference to the hotels to fill up rooms in those less busy weekends and weeks of the year. And is it something that contributes to the overall culture atmosphere that draws tourists to Charleston? So the next slide is what I'm just going to give you a little example. We don't formally do this when we review applications, but it's kind of a good way to look at the information that's provided in that application and evaluate it. So I have 4 events here. These are just ones I completely made up. And A, B, and D all have a total event budget of $100,000. And they all get $10,000 of A-tax from the city. Now, some of them also get some A-tax. A and B also get A-tax from somebody else because their total is $15,000. So they're getting $5,000 from maybe the town of Mount Pleasant. So if you look at their total attendance for each one, and then the number of tourists out of that total attendance number, you'll see that it gives some ways to look at this. And I'm going to move on. Amy, did you do this part for me? You did, didn't you? Anyway, so if you look at the total amount funded by A-tax in each of these examples, you'll see that in A and B, it's 15%, $15,000 out of $100,000. In C, which is a really large event, that's $2 million budget, the amount of A-tax is 10%, and in event D, it's 10%. And the percentage of tourists attending is 20%, 10%, 75%, 10%. So you'll notice that, oops, if you calculate the dollars of A-tax spent to provide for those number of tourists, you'll see that the first 2 are $5 per tourist because 10,000 in total attendance, 2,000 tourists each. The third one is $3.33 because you've got 30,000 tourists and we spent $100,000 on it. And then event D, it's a smaller event. We spent $10,000 on it, but it really only brought in 500 tourists. So if you look at A and B to compare those two, the difference between those two is the total attendance. In event A, the total attendance is 10,000. So the percentage of tourist attending is 20,000. And that is higher than the percentage of the budget funded by A-tax, which is 15%. But you look at event B, and because they've got another 10,000 in attendance and only 2,000 still are tourists, then that throws that off. The total percent of the budget is 15% that's funded by A-tax, but the percentage of tourists attending is only 10. Now the total cost per tourist is still the same, but really that doesn't line up right. So event B wouldn't really be a great, or $10,000 wouldn't be the right amount to give that event. And as you can see, event C obviously is the one that we're going to get the most bang for our buck. And event D is going to cost us a lot of money to get those 500 people in. So that's just kind of an example of what we're trying to kind of look at when we're looking at those various applications. So does anybody have any questions about that? I didn't mean to close it, but anybody have any questions? All right, well, we'll follow through and carry on with the rest of the main slideshow then. So
Thanks for the explanation, Kathy. That was great.
Oh, you're welcome. Approval of minutes. I realize that many of you who are here today were not part of the committee in 2020 when we had a meeting then, but we never got those minutes approved. So we have minutes for our last meeting in December and also from the previous November 2020 meeting. So Councilmember Gregory, I'll let you handle that.
Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Moved and properly seconded. All in favor, and we're looking at December 2nd and November 17th, 2020 minutes. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Kathy?
Okay. So the first thing we wanted to talk about before we give out, where we talk about the applications is I want to just refresh your memory on the revenue in the past years. We talked about this back in December, but in 2019, we received a little over $7.7 million of accommodations tax revenue from the state. In 2020, that number dropped considerably, as everybody knows, to 4.4. Actually, that's more than what we thought we would receive. So that was actually a little bit of a nice surprise at the end of the year that we did get that much. And in 2021, we had originally budgeted, I think, $3.6 million, because in 2020, that first quarter of 2020 was not impacted as much by COVID, but we didn't have any idea what would happen in 2021. And when we met back in December, we had just received the third quarter payment and we had not received the fourth quarter payment yet. So we really didn't know what to expect. But as it turns out, we did really well. In fact, we surpassed 2019. So that is part of the reason that we have more money available right now to give out these grant awards. And our plan is kind of to take that leftover 2021 money and what we may have in 2022 that wasn't allocated yet, kind of spread it over grants that we would give out for this year for 2022, and also grants we would give out for next year for 2023, to kind of give everybody a little bit more of a boost from the times of the pandemic where they would have not received a grant. So we're in the process of closing out our financial year 2021, but the excess revenue rolls into fund balance, which means it can be spent as long as it's part of the budget in 2022 or future years. Now, remember that requirement that we have to spend the money within 2 years after receiving it. We just have to watch that and make sure that we are spending appropriate amounts, that we're not holding on to too much of the funds. It is possible to hold on to more of it, but you have to ask the Tourism Expenditure Review Committee for permission to do that ahead of time. So that's what our goal is here, is to look at the money we have available. So we didn't have that normal grant process in 21 or 2020 for 2022, because we had other obligations and other things that were already committed, that we were committed to, that we just weren't positive that we would have enough funding, and we didn't want to give out awards and then have to tell everybody, oops, sorry, we don't have enough money, we can't give it to you after all.
Hey, Kathy, I just
Yeah.
want to interject there, because we would have been going through that process in July of 2021. And at that point in time, we had no idea where we were. So that's why we didn't do the process during 2021, which would have been for 2022. That makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, the state sends us this money quarterly, and there's somewhat of a delay because they have to collect it all first and process it and then send it to us. So, you know, we get it. Usually the first payment we get each year is in April. So we haven't even gotten one for 2022 yet. So that's why there's such a delay that makes it even harder to know what to budget and how much money we're going to have. So what we want to do today is to amend the 2022 budget to give out awards for the applications that we just collected Normally, like Amy said, they would have been done back in July, August, and we would have allocated the money when we did the budget back in the fall. But we're just now getting to that because we now know how much money we have for sure. So we're going to add grant award expenditures to this budget, and we're going to add some fund balance, some of the excess from 2021 to help cover the grant awards. And then we're gonna, we need to spend, like I said, we have to spend within 2 years. So now it is time for us to review the list of recommended awards that we sent you. There was a worksheet that the committee received that contained all the information about the various applications, and also the amount that city staff had recommended. We have city staff go through initially through all these applications just to check for things to make sure that they're eligible, that they are indeed a nonprofit that is registered appropriately with the state in order to solicit contributions in the state, and just a few other technical things that we look at. And kind of to help you guys out, we look at what, as staff and being familiar with these things over the years, what we would recommend that they be funded at. And now I'll turn it over to the committee.
Kathy, may I ask a question first?
Sure.
On all these organizations, do we know if any of them got any PPP money or any special funding from all this money that was sent out? And if they did, would that affect what we're doing?
Some of them we may know because of other communications we've had with them, but I don't think, Cherry Ann, correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't ask for that information on this grant application, did we?
No, we did not.
No. So no, I don't think, and Amy, you can speak up if you want, but we
let
still have to spend this money on tourism.
Yeah.
me ask the question this way, though. I mean, if they receive funds prior to the application, it would have to be on the application, wouldn't it?
It would be included in their total,
Yes.
their totals, but it may not be spelled out specifically.
Okay. Okay.
It would depend, because I think on our application, it says grant funding, right? Like other grant funding. So it
Correct.
could be separated out in that way, but we wouldn't know necessarily if it were ARPA related or CARES Act related. I don't think. And
Yeah.
because this is a tax and this is not ARPA funding, we're actually giving out a tax funding. I don't think it would affect anything that they're doing because it's specifically for whatever event they're trying to put on or whatever. So I don't think it would affect it at all. That makes sense.
Yes. Thanks for that answer.
Okay, so can y'all see that
Can-
now? The
Can I
list?
ask a question?
Sure, Ben.
I don't remember in the just out of curiosity, in the past doing this, I don't remember any monies given out of more than, say, I think like the max was like 150 in the past. Why do a couple of them get bumped up to 300 this time?
No, we've had grants higher than 150, if I'm not mistaken.
I think we've had one or two.
We have.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, the amounts that we are proposing to give out this year are higher because remember we talked about, we had leftover money from 2021 and we expect that we'll be over budget as far as revenue is concerned, possibly for 2022. And we're kind of, so we've accumulated some funds over time that we need to spend. And we also know that a lot of these organizations have really just been, trying to hold on and get through a difficult time so that they can reopen and operate as normal. So that is also one reason why we thought we would give out, more money this year and possibly next year than what we've given out in prior years.
But it's also when how much they ask. So in prior years, those organizations have always asked for more than what we've given them too. And because we have a little bit of extra funding this year, we might be able to fund them a little bit better than we have in the past, more so towards what they've asked for in the past, if that makes sense too.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay, hey Kathy,
Yeah,
do you want me to walk through, or are you gonna walk through each one of these?
it's wrong screen. Hold on just a second. Okay, Amy, this is what I was talking about. Do you want to run, or Councilmember Gregory, the two of you run through this, and I'm just gonna keep track of any changes that y'all want to make so we can keep it straight and have it added up at the end. We have allowed an extra $25,000 that's unallocated at this point that the committee can use to increase or give out awards to different groups that we didn't include perhaps. And that would, $25,000 without changing what we've recommended for existing groups. Now, I guess you could also make other changes that would either take funding away from an existing group to give it to someone else. But there's $25,000 of unallocated funding that is available.
Kathy, I have a general question,
Okay,
and I clearly understand that these grants can't be used for operating purposes, salaries and all that kind of stuff. But when I'm looking at art forms, okay, one of the smaller grantees, and when I compare him with some of the other kind of theater groups, I see where there is artistic production costs, for instance, 20% of the grant would be for that. And I'm looking at Charleston Jazz really. But just in looking at all of them, okay, most of them are definitely specific advertisement and promotion only. And I was wondering, as I go through it, there are some cases where the recommendation is lower than the request. And if I look at the description, I'm trying to find out whether or not, for instance, the request is lower because perhaps there was a portion that was not specific out-market advertising promotion only. And I'll use Charleston Jazz as an example, and I'll get back up to art forms. Charleston Jazz is an example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it's the sixth one.
Mhm.
Okay, their request was 115, right?
right.
We're recommending 85,000. Now, when I look at the description, funds are also requested for 20% of artistic and production cost, which apparently is eligible. And where I'm leading to is, can those same provisions be used for some of the smaller organizations, such as art forms, to make them a bit stronger or as strong, that 20% of their funds can be used for artistic and production costs. There's another one here where funds will also be used for equipment rental and rental of venues. All of which are things that your smaller art organizations also have to do. I don't know if they're not aware of it, but as I read through the descriptions, and it appears as though art forms based on whatever is kind of lockstep and just using their money for promotions, and does not appear to At least they didn't request it either, by the way. But I'm just trying to determine if they could have.
The
Done the
applic-
same.
Yeah, if you look at the application, and excuse me, I'm just gonna grab an application from the other side of my office, just so I can look at it.
You know, I got them all.
I know you do. I got them all too. They were just over on my table where I couldn't reach them.
Okay. You understand my question, right?
Yes, sir. If you look at page 4 of the application, funding request for budget year 2022.
Yes.
So you'll see that we have it broken down, and it sort of follows the things we went over in the orientation about the types of things that the state law says are eligible. The first one being advertising and promotion, which we talked about, is the one that's the easiest to document. And then the maintenance and operation of tourism related facilities or buildings,
Yes.
then construction, and then equipment, and then other. So down under other, it's where they could ask for production cost or different things. And sometimes it might also fall under, like, for some, like the museums or the art galleries, it would fall under item B, maintenance or operation of a tourism related facility or building. So yes, some of that is eligible. It just may be for some of the groups that we felt like that was a bigger ask than what we should, or maybe wasn't as easily documented as being tourism related.
Okay, and that's what I concluded. Okay, that's what I concluded. Okay, but in the same token, I'm just trying to see whether or not some of these smaller groups can sort of under other do X, Y, Z. You guys will check. You guys will check it to see whether or not it's eligible or not.
Right.
Got it.
We like to make sure that we feel like if the state asks us a question about that group, because we do get questions from the Tourism Expenditure Review Committee occasionally about how something, for us to explain to them how we decided that something was tourism related.
Okay.
So it's much more clear cut if we stick to advertising for some of the groups that we're not sure what their real tourism impact might be.
Yes.
Because advertising is out of market is automatically qualified.
Yeah.
Sort of like, even if it didn't work and they didn't get that many tourists, it's still advertising, it's out of market.
Yes. I just wanted to try to clear that up. Edward, you had another question?
No, I'm fine.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm clear now.
Okay. Good, because now I'm confused.
Well, what I was attempting to do, and we're at art forms and theater concepts, right?
Yes.
That's the one. Okay. I'm saying yay to it because we still have that organization under the watchful eye of our Office of Cultural Affairs. Okay.
Right.
So for me, I would recommend yes for that one. However, the reason why I raised the question is to give the applicant the opportunity, if necessary, to attempt to amend the application to include under other such things as artistic production costs, et cetera, et cetera. That was the
Right.
only reason I raised it, okay?
Okay.
Is that
And I will say that with art forms and theater concepts, just so you, the rest of the committee will be aware of this, we have funded them on a reimbursement basis. They have to show us their invoices documenting the tourism related expenditures, and then we reimburse them for that. Because there's been some issues in the past when our internal auditor has audited them. So we are working with them, and Cultural Affairs has stepped up and is willing to work with them to help them document those tourism expenditures and submit those invoices for reimbursement. And that was one of the reasons that perhaps we didn't recommend the higher amount that they had requested, because they haven't been able to document as much in tourism expenditures over the past few years as what we have attempted to give them.
And more recently, they're spending problems. They're not spending it.
Yeah, so we probably are skirting into territory we shouldn't talk about in a public
Yes,
meeting.
yes.
But that's part of it.
Okay, so my recommendations for item 1 is a yay. I don't know if anyone else have any discussions or do we want to do a motion for each one?
I don't think we need to do that. I think if we just go through them, and if anybody wants to recommend a change to
Got
the
it.
amount that's listed here, like for art forms, it's listed at 20,000. If somebody wanted to make a change, I could, plug in a number here and it would give us the revised amount, and then we would know. I mean, we've got $25,000 to distribute if you want to.
I think we're fine where we are. The next one we can go to. Unless anyone has any questions on item 1.
Oh,
No, I think this is a question, and I know we need to get past the first one. I promise I'm sure we'll serve them quickly, but when it comes to auditing the use of these funds and understanding who has a history of being good stewards of the dollars per the letter of what the inspiration, the spirit of the ATAX funding is. It does, other ATAX committees I've served on that was a key piece of what did you do with this? And we don't need to get into the details of it, but you had mentioned there is an audit system to go through and kind of track progress of funding that was provided.
Okay, so we require, and state law requires this, that anyone we give the funding to also has to submit a report back to us at the end of the year documenting how they spent the money. And if their award was $5,000 or less, we ask them to just go ahead and include invoices with that so that we can see exactly what they spent it on. If their award was higher than that, then we just ask them to fill out the report, and it's basically a report that kind of has the same, we ask them programmatic questions like, was your event successful, and all that kind of stuff, but also has an area for them to fill in what they spent some funds on. Our internal auditor usually takes like a sample of awards each year, maybe 5 of them, maybe a few more, depending on if there's some areas we suspect we may have some issues with. And they will go to those organizations and actually perform a quick little audit, ask them to show documentation for those expenditures. So we wouldn't really be auditing the ones that spent less than $5,000, but some of the larger ones, the auditor may go and want to see invoices and documentation, and maybe there are other funding sources, and just look at as a whole, do they feel like the money was appropriately spent?
And that monitoring is pretty extensive, by the way, when we do that.
Yeah.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Let's just keep going then. Any questions, discussions on number 2? Any issues or questions on number 3, Black Pages International? Any issues, questions on Charleston area sports? Charleston Literary Festival. Item 5. Item 6. Charleston Jazz Artists of Charleston. Item 7. Charleston Library Society. Item.
I think on the Charleston Library Society, they were granted $25,000 in 2020. They've asked for $25,000. The recommendation in the city was $15,000. And I was just having gone through it and looked at their application, and some of their financial resources would advocate for a little more funding, unless there is staff reason why that's not smart.
So you think that should be increased, you're saying?
I would think either match what the request was at 25 or maybe 20. It just seemed like it was low, and if we had more resources to allocate, we should.
Kathy, can you give us the rationale for the $10,000 difference?
Yes, 14,500 of what they requested was for assisted listening devices for ADA compliance and exhibition and preservation equipment. And we felt like that wasn't as good toward the tourist as it was toward their normal membership and their normal visitors. You know, they're members of the Library Society that would be locals. That we just didn't see that that would actually be specifically for tourists. It would be used by everyone that came to the Library Society.
It doesn't put heads in beds.
Correct.
Got it. Makes sense.
Okay. Let's move on to number 8, the Charleston Museum. Questions? Item 9, the Charleston Playhouse. They requested almost 300,000. We're recommending 25. Big difference. Kathy?
Yes. If you look at their application, you'll see that they are a very new organization and that most of the money they were asking for, in fact, $275,000 of that amount was basically for fundraising, general operations, community outreach, production costs, educational outreach, and other expenses. In other words, they pretty much wanted us to foot the bill for establishing the organization.
Correct.
So we felt like what they asked for in terms of advertising and promotion would qualify, and they do have the potential to, you know, bring in tourists, or tourists would attend their events, but we didn't feel like we should support them 100%. Their budget for 2021 was $92,700. So they're asking for a lot more money than that. And we don't see any other funding sources that they have available. So we just didn't feel like we could fund all of that and that it would be qualified.
I went through the application like you did, and I agree.
Okay.
So in other words, just, I mean, it's a new organization that has the potential to have a significant impact in tourism in Charleston if it gets off the ground, but it doesn't have a proven track record. And the purpose of ATAX funds is not to be seed money for a new organization. It's kind of what you've come to.
Right.
Makes
Right.
sense. Got it. Yeah, makes sense.
Charleston Stage. Symphony Orchestra, item 11. Item 12, I have a comment on item 12. I mean, they moved the wine and food festival to North Charleston. While we may get some residual, I mean, North Charleston's at a point now where, you know, they can accommodate, they accommodate, they have hotels. So my question now is, are we investing $150,000 in an organization that decided to take the festival from downtown Charleston to North Charleston? For me, that's problematic, and it's a lot of money for something that does not take place in our city any longer. And I'm just throwing it out for discussion.
Well, let me tell you what the staff was thinking when they looked at this one. We know that that main event, the Taste of Charleston, or whatever they call it, where, you know, the food village was in North Charleston. But we felt like with the restaurants that were downtown and the hotels that were downtown, and the fact that there's a lot of repeat visitors for the Charleston Wine and Food, that a lot of people would be staying downtown and only going up to North Charleston for that one part of the festival. That there were still some things happening downtown, and there's still a large draw downtown with the number of restaurants. But perhaps our people on the committee that are in the hotel and restaurant business could address whether they still felt an impact this past year with the event having their headline event in North Charleston. Y'all still see impact that weekend?
Yeah,
Justify $150,000 for an event that takes place in North Charleston.
yeah, I see what you're saying. It's definitely disappointing, and I also understand they're paying a fee for the use of space in North Charleston, which, you know, kind of antithetical to what A-tax is used for. The impact of the Charleston Wine and Food Festival on Charleston tourism is not insignificant, and there are events that happen downtown proper. I guess the question is, what impact of the funding request does the fact that their main event happening in North Charleston have on the total amount granted? And you know, I don't know the answer to that, but, you know, from our perspective, you know, within Charleston Place and some of the other hospitality endeavors, it's a pretty significant deal and a great marketing tool.
Yeah, but I mean, did someone else have a question?
I think, no, not to insult North Charleston or anywhere up there, but I don't think they have the volume of quality restaurants that we have downtown and in some of the suburbs. So I don't know that moving the event up there has affected the number of tourists that would eat at our establishments. I think, like you pointed out earlier, that it's just they'll travel up there for the event, but I don't think they're staying up there. I can appreciate your thought about, you know, why should we fund it 100% if they're moving it to another city. That has merit, but I don't think that it's been such a negative effect overall.
You know, my only problem with that is that, you know, we don't know. We don't have any data to support it either way. But I would suggest that a lot of folks do come down and they don't stay. That could just based on location infuse our economy locally considerably. Some may just drive down for the day. That captures a lot of money. I just have a problem with us paying for something that in another jurisdiction that also receives accommodation dollars that look like they can take care of the shortfall. I just don't see us spending $150,000 when they went to another venue. That's just my major concern. I don't want, for one, I don't want us to set a precedent here either, where we'll be now funding activities in other jurisdictions with our limited dollars. I mean, for instance, I don't know whether or not you guys took a look at the package, but there's one application in there that is not funded because the application was received late, and that's Closing the Gap. Closing the Gap brings tens of thousands of dollars with their jazz festival to this community. And so to me, that's something that we should try to consider funding with a part of this $150,000 going to another venue outside of our city. And when I go to the Bridge Run, I have sort of the same problem. We're giving North Charleston $50,000 to use their convention center. Why can't they give $50,000? These
Yeah.
are just issues and concerns that I have personally, especially when we're talking about $150,000 going to someone who took their festival somewhere else.
Kathy, is there a way to find out what kind of tax funds they'll get from other municipalities, or you can't access that until, I'm assuming, next fiscal year?
Well, they do have, they're supposed to report it on our application, but I wouldn't know for sure until they turn in, say, the application for the following year, whether they actually got any.
Well, let's just table that one for now and keep moving on.
Well, can I ask one question before we move on?
Oh, sure.
I'm just curious, on this application, as well as some others, there's a line under the budget from 2021 for fundraising. What exactly is the difference between fundraising and advertising?
Fundraising is holding-
Advertise to fundraise. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think fundraising falls into maybe having events that raise funds for something like
I would think so, but this, the Food and Wine Festival, they're budgeting to spend $235,000 on fundraising. It just seems like an awful lot of money. And I don't know where in the earned incomes or sources of income shows any huge fundraising dollars. I'm just curious what. And it's several other applications that have the same situation. So,
right.
okay.
I will say that with Food and Wine, one thing that the committee internally, the staff looked at was the fact that all of their $150,000 that they were requesting was for advertising and out of market, and none of it was for production cost or any of that sort of thing. So
Okay.
we felt that was still bringing, that still had a really good chance of impacting our hospitality industry within the city of Charleston.
Right. Okay.
But I'm not on the committee, so that's up to y'all.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. We could, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that I understand the issue. There is a huge marketing lift that I think the city gets. We were on the Today Show. All of the chefs in the city, the amount of, if their data is right, the 2019 study, the College of Charleston, the amount of room nights they drive in the city. So maybe it's a, hey, we're not gonna honor 150,000, we're gonna give you 100,000. We're gonna earmark 50,000 to be used for another organization that's worthy. For the purposes of, a majority of the event is in North Charleston, and so we don't feel it's appropriate to fund the entire thing.
Yeah, well, okay, let's just think about it and go through the others.
Okay.
Let's come back to item 12. The Children's Museum, item 13. Columbia Ballet. Company. Cooper River Bridge Run.
You had mentioned concerns with this, and you might.
If you go to the application, $50,000 of it goes to North Charleston for renting their convention center. If I'm not mistaken, the way I read it. Did you
And we
read
said no on that. The
Huh?
total they requested was 260,000.
Yes,
So we didn't fund that piece of it. We recommended 150,000. Which was the 100,000 plus some of the other things listed down lower on the application.
so you
Well,
think,
if their initial, their request on the front page of the application is 150,000, but if you look at page 4, actually what they asked for adds up to 260,000.
I see.
So we elected the staff was recommending 150 for the 100,000 for the advertising and promotions, and some of the other costs down there, the fencing or the security and the kids running, those kind of things, not the money that went to North Charleston Convention Center.
Makes sense.
Okay, well, I thought that they were very specific that 50,000 was, so you're saying you took that out?
Yes, we looked at the total that they asked for on page 4,
Okay,
which is 260,000, took out the 50,000 and then didn't fund all the rest of it either. We just picked 100 for the advertising and 50 for some of the other costs that they requested.
okay. I won't question you guys on that one. Okay. Any other questions on the bridge run?
No, supportive.
Drayton Hall, item 17. The Gibbs Museum. The Hazley Institute. Item 20, Healthy Lifestyle Network. That's the Caribbean Fest. That's the Cara
Harry Fest.
Carry Fest. Okay. I mean, if we could, I really would like to raise that a bit, at least to 10,000.
Councilmember Gregory, we didn't really feel like we should give them more than what they asked for because they obviously have other funding sources and whatnot. And we
Oh,
weren't
you
sure
did.
that,
You're absolutely correct. I didn't look at that, that's what they asked for.
yeah,
Thanks. Let's leave it alone. Historical Charleston Foundation. Why did we cut them by 25,000 from their request? Because it looks like it's all for advertisement. If I'm not mistaken.
I am not sure that we had a specific reason.
On page 6, they did not fill in their non-tourist. I'm sorry, they did not fill in their tourist visits. So we were unsure. They just had the total attendance number.
Right.
So I think that's why we,
So they didn't show the 40% or whatever?
yeah.
Okay, all right. The James Island Foundation,
$2,000.
they requested 25,000, Kathy. Is this the one where they wanted to do the wall and the floors and stuff?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And this foundation and this facility that they're talking about is part of the town of James Island.
Yes.
And I guess we felt like maybe we shouldn't, that it wasn't as tourism related as what they maybe hoped it would be.
Okay.
That we wanted to fund their advertising piece of it, the $2,000 that they requested, but not the other piece of it, which
Okay.
may be more for locals than for tourists.
And the other piece would not fit under other.
Yeah, it was equipment. It was the reactive wall and the dynamic floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Item 23. Pure Theater. The Sophia Institute. The Aquarium.
Hey, can we go back to the Sophia Institute on the $20,000 ask and the $2,500 suggestion? And if I remember right, they had allocated $32,000 to marketing. And so I was just trying to understand their application. What did you come up with, Kathy, and staff for Sophia?
We
Yeah.
weren't real sure what their actual ask was since they filled in, had two different numbers on the face of the application and on page 4. But I think we were more concerned with the number of tourists they had listed on page 6. And that would work out to about, if we gave them as much money as they were asking for, it would be a substantial amount per tourist that they potentially brought in.
But can we do a little better than 2,500 though?
That's up to y'all. You've got $25,000 more that you can allocate.
I really think that we should at least try to give them 5,000. I want to.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I agree as well.
Okay.
So is a proposal to add 2,500 to get them to 5,000 total? Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Yes.
The aquarium. The Historical Society. The Southeastern Wildlife Exposition. I hope they never decide to leave and go to North Charleston. The Toledo Festival. Turkey Day Run. Item 31, 34 West Theater. Y'all Fest. And closing the gap on healthcare. Got to us late. And I really, how many, I guess what I should ask is how many applications that came in late?
Just this one, sir. And we did fund them at the $85,000.
We wanted to leave it up to the committee to determine whether or not you wanted to exclude them because they were late, or if you wanted to go ahead and fund them. They were the only ones. We felt like it was something probably if they hadn't been late, we would have funded.
Yeah, it's a good organization. I agree with Councilman Gregory.
Does that also set a precedent though in the future? I mean, I'm for funding them, but
Date was late. What was the date?
It was due on February the 3rd. It was received on February 23rd. We do state on our application that late applications shall not be funded. We have, I guess our dilemma with that is enforcing that and keeping to that if someone like Spoleto or Southeastern Wildlife was late. Because if they're late by 5 minutes, is that the same as being late by 20 days? Or 3 days or 2 days or whatever?
Late is late.
Yeah.
It is late. I think too, the reason why, because normally we wouldn't put this in here, Councilmember Gregory, and fund him, and then we have this conversation usually at the committee level, but because the cycle is so different from what we normally do, that was another reason, because I know a lot of organizations weren't necessarily expecting to have an application process in January. So that's why we went ahead and put it in here for the committee to kind of think about, because we are really off our normal cycle. Even though we did advertise it out and we did reach out to our normal applicants and we did normally what we do, but anyways, that was another reason why we decided to just include it and have the discussion later.
I really think it's a good reason, and I think it would be a good reason for us in the future to use as a basis for why we did.
Agreed.
And we had enough money to.
You said we included it in our total, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. My recommendations would be to move forward with the Closing the Gap application because they bring thousands of people to the city at that festival.
Agreed.
Heads and beds,
I'm sorry, what was your recommendation?
that we fund them.
The whole 85,000?
Yes.
Because we only have 25,000. Where's the other 60 coming from?
Yeah, the 85 is already included in our total.
Mhm.
No, is it? I don't see where it's budgeted for that.
Look at the bottom of page 33. That 85 is in that total, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, and on the budget, it's listed as jazz artists or Low Country Jazz Festival. I think it's listed differently on. the
Okay,
budget
I see.
account.
Okay, gotcha.
Mhm,
now.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
So we won't be pulling.
All right. Well, I'm fine with it as long as, I'm fine with it, and I agree, they're a good group, as long as y'all are willing to deal with people in the future. You know,
I think we can, given the circumstances.
Yeah.
I think it could be justified. Let's go back up to Food and Wine Festival. My suggestion, at a minimum, $50,000.
To give them 50 or take away 50?
Give them 50.
now you're talking about Food and Wine to take away 50 because they left city, right?
100. I'm saying just give them 50.
Oh, Jesus. I think if you, I don't know what the numbers would be, but I think I think the impact they've had on Charleston tourism has been tremendous. And like somebody said earlier, it's not, the event is up there. Yes, I think we probably ought to slap their wrist for it, so to speak, in a certain small financial way. But we're a culinary town, and again, not to insult North Charleston, but there's not an awful lot of culinary restaurants up there, and I'll probably get grief from a lot of my friends for this, but there's not as many. There's some good restaurants up there, don't get me wrong, but the majority of the culinary restaurants that people perceive are in Charleston, especially downtown.
Ed, I totally agree with you. And if I follow your logic, then why isn't it downtown where all the great restaurants are?
You'd have to ask them. Maybe they got a deal to go up there. I don't know. Maybe that's why. And I agree that we ought to tell them they need to get a little more funding from North Charleston. But to go and take 100 out of the $150,000, I think is extreme personally.
Okay, well, let's do 75.
I still think that we're getting the majority of I think we're getting the great majority of the return comes to Charleston. I could go for maybe 50, but I can't see 75. Maybe take 50 away and tell them to go get 50 from North Charleston, and that's my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you, Edward. I was thinking docking 25 or 50 grand. Ben, sorry.
Ben?
I can tell that they're trying to do a lot more, and they're trying to make it a bigger event. It would be a shame if they had to spend money from other places to advertise. But I understand your point, Councilman.
Yeah.
What if we funded them and basically said, by the way, guys, we were going to take $50,000, $75,000 away from your budget, but we've agreed to continue to fund it this year. However, if you continue to have it in North Charleston, you're going to have to go to North Charleston and ask for extra funds because we're going to reduce it next year. We're not going to say how much we're going to reduce it, but we definitely, we definitely think that some adjustments need to be made. What about that? Because I agree with Ben. I don't know what. Anyway, I think the majority of the return is felt in Charleston.
Agreed.
I'd just like to see the data. Councilman Seekings, are you on the line? Are you on this call?
I am, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have any comments, Councilman?
I do. Thank you. And thank you, everyone on the committee for serving. Before Councilmember Gregory was the chair of this committee, I was, and it's always been an interesting process to go through. I tuned in today specifically to listen to this conversation about Charleston Food and Wine Festival, and I'd like to just give a little perspective from where I sit, which is on City Council, where we're going to take up the vote on this. We through this committee and through the city have funded Charleston Food and Wine Festival at very high levels for many years. And the return that we've gotten clearly has been some benefit in the city to those of you in the industry, but we as a city have not gotten back from them what we've given to them. And just so you all know, when they decided to move and become the North Charleston Food and Wine Festival, they did two things. One is they left without telling us. We found out about it by reading it in the newspaper. And secondly, they're still trading off the name of Charleston, and they're getting a huge benefit from that. It's not the North Charleston Food and Wine Festival, it's the Charleston Food and Wine Festival. I will just tell you from my perspective, as someone who's going to vote on this, I think even giving them 50,000 is generous. I would vote for that amount, but I will not and will probably lobby very hard against a dime more than that. I just think the manner in which they've dealt with the city and traded off our name without giving back to us even the courtesy of a heads up that they were leaving, and they want to expand that festival, but they want to expand it in a different jurisdiction, really to me is problematic. So I just wanted to just give you that perspective. I'm not a member of this committee, and I will take whatever recommendations you make and consider them as I do with everything. But my intent is to speak out pretty loudly about this and to make sure that this doesn't happen again, especially with a group that we have funded at a huge level for many, many, many years. Not so much the courtesy of a phone call to me is problematic. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for letting me speak. I'm in my car. I hope you could hear me. And members of the committee, thank you for your service. I and all of us greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. And I think the committee needs to know that what we're doing are just basically recommendations. When it goes to council, council can have similar discussions that we're having to get some background information. So, I mean, we can put it wherever we want it, but the final will be 7 votes on council to determine what it will be. So where are we in terms of amount? I'm still at my 50. If the majority wants to do better than that, then make a recommendation.
Yeah, I'd suggest 100 with further conversation to Edward's point about we need data and an understanding of the impact. Seems like a fair approach on this, given the significance it has in theory on room nights. And you're right, we need more data, but it seems too risky not to provide more than 50, in my opinion.
Okay, is that a motion? Is that motion seconded? I want to vote on this one separate. Is that a motion? Is it seconded? Ed, you second it?
I would second it if Casey is making a motion.
Okay, moved and properly seconded that we fund the festival at the tune of $100,000. Can we take a roll call on this one if we can, Kathy, to all the members so we'll know?
Sure. Andrea, is that something you should do? Take the roll call?
I can do it if you'd like.
Sure.
Yes, please.
Make it official.
And so none of their representatives chose to attend this meeting today? They usually show up in the past.
Yes, they do, and fight for it.
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea, that the Zoom link was only sent out to committee members, and members of the public or these groups could call in by conference call, but I think they're muted.
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
So they may have something to say, but they just may not be able to.
No,
at this point.
we'll have a public comment period at council.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's good.
and it'll be properly advertised. Could you call the roll for me, please?
Yes, sir. So the motion was made by Casey for 100,000 and that was seconded by Edward. So Ben,
I agree with the motion. Aye.
okay. Jamie,
Aye.
thank you, and Councilmember Gregory.
Nay?
All right, the motion carries.
Okay, now let's go back to all of them, including the amendment to fund closing the gap. Do I hear a motion?
Yeah, so moved.
Casey?
Yes, so moved.
Okay, do I hear a second?
I second.
Moved and properly seconded. All in favor of the amounts we agreed on for the tax accommodation tax applications, please say aye.
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 Sounds like the ayes have it. Next, this will be moved to council with our recommendation.
All right, let me just go back for just a second. So what you just voted on, to clarify, is the list that's showing on on the screen that I shared with you that has the total amount that we are awarding as 2.509876. Is that correct?
And you've taken the 50 out?
Yes, the 50 is out. We added $2,500 for Sophia Institute and we took out 50 for wine and food. So there's our new total.
Okay,
And then, so we're good on that.
okay.
So now let's go back to our slideshow. So we've discussed the applications and we've moved on with that. Next slide, let me get back to where I was. Okay, so now we have to vote on the amended budget itself.
Yeah.
So the amended budget will have those changes made in this part of the budget.
Yes.
But here's the revenue part of the budget, just for you to see the beginning part of it. One thing I would like to point out is that we, at a request that we received just recently, we also added in $50,000 for the Charleston Museum because they are having trouble with their HVAC system and chillers. And it's going to cost them about $400,000, they think, to get that fixed. They're concerned that if they continue to have problems, it may damage their collections as far as the humidity and, the temperature. So since we do have extra money this year and we do own a third of that museum facility, we added in $50,000 to help them out with that. They're also getting $100,000 from Charleston County, and they've been able to identify $200,000 in their own budget that they can put toward the project. So we felt $50,000 was a fair contribution for the city to make since we are partial owners of the building. So at the top, we added in fund balance, as I talked about in the earlier presentation about fund balance that rolled over from 2021. We added in fund balance along with the revenues that we had budgeted for this year to give us enough money to fund the amounts below. So if we distribute the $2,500 from this $25,000 we have budgeted, and make the other changes that take 50 away from food and wine, we will have a little bit of a surplus in the budget, which means I can go back and adjust that fund balance number to make it all balanced. Amy,
Yeah.
does that sound okay to you?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay, so then what we would be voting on when we vote on this amended budget will be not exactly what's on your screen, but a different amount, and I can resend that out to you once I update it.
Okay. Okay, so we should vote on this as amended.
Yes,
Okay, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second, any second?
Second.
Moved and properly seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 The ayes have it.
okay. Moving on. Last slide. Okay, other business. As Amy mentioned before, we're really off schedule on our grant process because of how the pandemic interrupted our revenues, and we just weren't sure how much we'd have. We do plan to return to our normal grant application process schedule for the 2023 budget cycle. We start, of course, that budget cycle in the summer of this year of 2022 to get ready for 2023. We will have the grant process at that point. So in about 6 months, we'll be doing this again as far as y'all having a stack of applications to read and a committee meeting. Applications are normally due in August, and then we would get those out to you with proposed budget once we're far enough into the fall to have a good estimate of what the revenues available might be. Again, we get this money quarterly from the state, so we won't have very much money. If by August, we might have half a year's revenue. So it'll probably be later than that before we send you information. And we plan to have that meeting in November. And that's all I have.
Is there anything else to come before this committee?
That's great.
Thanks, staff. Great job.
Thank
Appreciate
you
it.
very much.
Thank you.
This meeting's adjourned. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.